Hi, I'm Marlo. The night before the party, my father sent me a text. Don't come. The party's not for failures. 10 seconds later, my mother chimed in, it wouldn't look good for the image. I stared at my phone in silence. They didn't know. The CEO their entire $590 million deal depended on was me. And the next morning, their empire crumbled. But it wasn't just about the deal. It was about the years of silence, the quiet cruelty, the way they erased me from their story like I'd never existed. You think betrayal hurts? Try being invisible in your own family. What would you have done in my place? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. Odds. The blinking cursor on my laptop was the only movement in my apartment that night. The soft hum of the heater mixed with the tapping of my fingers across the keyboard, working through client proposals while the rest of the world outside celebrated the holiday season. A pine-scented candle burned low on my windowsill, trying too hard to pretend there was warmth in this room. There wasn't. Then came the first vibration. I reached for my phone without looking, expecting a client email or an end-of-day confirmation. Instead, the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Dad. Don't come. The party's not for failures. I stared at it. My fingers hovered over the screen, frozen. Before I could blink, another message appeared. Mom. It wouldn't look good for the image. No punctuation, no apology, just the same emptiness they always served, this time in digital form. I didn't text back. What could I say that hadn't already died in me years ago? I let the phone fall gently to the couch beside me, then I turned back to my laptop. One tab open showed my team's latest report, a multi-billion-dollar real estate merger in the works. The name they needed approval from? KL Andrews Holdings. My name, hidden under layers of legal architecture. They had no clue the reclusive investor delaying their $590 million deal was the same woman they'd just disinvited from Christmas. I closed the lid of the laptop slowly and leaned back. A gust of wind rattled the window behind me. It sounded like something trying to get in, or get out. I stood up, walked to the small console table by the front door, and opened the drawer. Inside was a wrapped gift I'd meant to send my niece weeks ago, an astronomy kit she'd mentioned over the summer. I'd wrapped it in silver paper and a galaxy-themed ribbon. I hadn't written a name on it. Maybe I knew, deep down, it wouldn't be needed. As I closed the drawer, the buzzer rang. Surprised, I pressed the intercom. Delivery for Marlo? I didn't order anything, I said into the mic. It's addressed here. I buzzed the courier up. He handed me a sleek white envelope, the kind that feels expensive before you even open it. There was no return address, no name. Inside, I found a holiday card, embossed gold edges, crisp linen stock. But the card itself was blank. Not even a generic greeting. Just space, cold and elegant. I stared at it for a while, unsure if it was some kind of prank or a cruel metaphor dropped on my doorstep. The last time I had this same hollow feeling was years ago, when I saw the family Christmas card on Facebook. I wasn't in it. I hadn't even been told they were taking one. It was like I'd been quietly erased, like I was only ever invited to disappear. I walked back to the couch and sat down, the blank card still in my hand. It felt heavier than it should. I looked around my living room. The minimalist shelves, the neutral tones, the soft throw blanket folded perfectly across the armrest. Everything in here I had built myself, every object earned. And yet somehow, it still didn't feel like I was enough. For them. I remembered the first time I overheard my father call me a waste of potential. I was 24. Fresh out of grad school, I had just turned down a consulting offer to work on an idea that would later become my first company. He said I was chasing dreams like a teenager. Weston, my younger brother, had been praised that same month for closing a small business loan to expand his custom sneaker store. From that moment on, he was the golden child, flashy, loud, always trying, as if trying were more noble than succeeding silently. Meanwhile, I worked, quietly, relentlessly, and I never corrected them, not when they asked if I still freelanced or if I'd ever find something stable. I just let them believe what they wanted. Now they were scrambling to save the very company I controlled. I stood up again, walked to the desk in the corner, and flipped through the latest contract my legal team had flagged. My father's company, technically now my brother's, though Dad still ran it from behind the scenes, was pitching to merge with a South Korean conglomerate. The funding required final sign-off from KL Andrews Holdings. We'd delayed for 3 weeks, waiting on their compliance documents. But really, I'd been waiting on a sign, something, anything, some shred of human decency that might tell me this deal wasn't just about money, that they saw me, respected me. Instead, they sent 2 texts telling me to stay away because I was a failure. I laughed under my breath, not because it was funny, but because the irony felt so sharp it cut through the stillness. Outside, snow had started to fall. The wind carried the sound of distant laughter, muffled through double-paned glass, families gathering, people being chosen, welcomed. I looked down again at the blank card. This was what I meant to them. A name with no place, a presence with no seat. But I didn't need their table to matter. I never had. I slipped the card back into the envelope. Then I pulled out a note card of my own and began to write. Not to them, but to the lawyers, finalizing what I had already decided deep in my bones. Their deal? It would fall apart before it even began. I slipped the blank invitation back in the envelope and wrote one of my own, not with ink or embossed letters, but with silence. It was the same silence they'd once handed me like a second helping of shame, except now I was serving it back, quietly, deliberately. As I sealed the envelope and placed it beside the financial documents on my desk, the motion triggered something. A memory. One I had folded and tucked deep away like a napkin over a wound. Christmas, 3 years ago. Savannah. The air was crisp when I pulled into the long circular driveway of the family estate that afternoon. The pine trees lining the front walk were strung with white lights, flickering like they'd been choreographed to charm. Inside, through the frosted windows, I saw silhouettes moving, glasses clinking and shadows dancing across high ceilings. I had driven down from Atlanta early to help. At the time, I was still in consulting, building my name quietly, contract by contract. No one in my family really knew what I did. If they asked, it was usually followed by, "Is that like freelance?" Mom opened the door with a too tight smile. Her lipstick didn't match her tone. "You're early, Marlo," she said, stepping aside without touching me. "Here." She handed me an apron. It was pale pink, embroidered with a stitched holly branch. "Stay in the kitchen, sweetie. The real guests are arriving soon." I blinked. "Aren't I?" "You said you'd help, right?" She was already turning back toward the dining room. "Just keep an eye on the roast." Inside the kitchen, my sister-in-law Trina was pouring spiced cider into a punch bowl. She looked up and grinned the way a woman might when she spots someone wearing last season's shoes. "Oh, Marlo," she cooed, "you make a great staffer. Maybe that's your calling. Have you ever thought about catering?" I smiled thinly, said nothing, tied the apron behind my back and stirred the cranberry glaze simmering on the stove. The day rolled on in a haze of instructions and doorbells. When the guests arrived, I stayed in the kitchen as asked, watching through the doorway as they laughed and hugged and sipped on wine I'd uncorked myself. Eventually, I stepped out to check the table. It was stunning, as always. Polished cherry wood, gold-rimmed china, name cards written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. I skimmed along the table. Weston, Trina, Nana, Uncle Jim. I kept looking, but there was no place card for me. At the far end, by the swinging door to the kitchen, a lone chair stood next to a folding tray, like a server's spot. No plate, no silverware, just a folded napkin and a bottle of sparkling water. I stood there a moment too long. "Oh, are you the hired help?" a guest asked from behind, his voice genuinely curious. I turned. He smiled politely, gesturing to his empty glass. "Could you top this off?" I nodded once, took the glass, and returned to the kitchen without a word. The entire evening blurred after that. I kept busy, poured, cleaned, checked the roast, wiped down countertops no one would see. Then came dessert. I brought out the homemade pecan tarts and gingerbread cookies on silver platters, trying to steady my hands. My niece Harper ran up to me as I passed. She was 5 then, in a red velvet dress with sparkly tights. "Auntie Kay, I made you something." She held out a little folded card made from construction paper and glitter glue. On the front, in shaky block letters, it said, "You're special." Before I could take it, Trina stepped in. "Oh, honey, that's for Mommy's fridge. Not now," she said, pulling Harper gently away. "Go sit. We're about to do the toast." Harper's face fell, but she obeyed. I stood at the side of the room while my father raised his glass. "To Weston," he said, beaming, "and to the children who made something of themselves." The room applauded. I stood in the corner, holding the dessert tray like it was a shield. No one looked my way. No one mentioned my name, not even once. The applause faded. Conversation returned. I stepped backward slowly, turned, and slipped through the kitchen door. No one noticed when I left out the back. The cold hit my face like clarity. I walked toward my rental car parked beneath the bare magnolia tree, opened the driver's side door, and sat inside for a long while with the engine off, just watching the snow start to fall across the windshield. Back in the present, I stood in front of the mirror above my sink. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had left that dinner with a tart dish in one hand and her pride in the other. I touched my reflection lightly, the edge of my fingertip tracing the faint lines around my eyes. "They erased me long before they disinvited me," I said softly. "I just didn't want to believe it then." And yet, the night I left, I took something with me that none of them realized until it was too late. That night, back in Savannah, I'd stuffed a worn cardboard box into the trunk of my rental car. No one saw, no one asked, just like always. I told myself it was nothing important, just old papers, a few drawings, leftovers from a dream I once had the audacity to believe in. Now, 3 years later, that box sat in the back of my closet, buried under folded linens and a suitcase I hadn't touched since moving into this apartment. Most days I didn't think about it. But tonight, something about that text from Dad had shifted the weight in my chest. "Don't come. The party's not for failures." I hadn't responded. What was there to say? It wasn't the insult that cut. It was the fact that it sounded so familiar. Not cruel, just practiced, like a line rehearsed and finally delivered. This wasn't rejection. It was a reminder of where I stood in their eyes and where I no longer belonged. I walked barefoot across the hardwood floor, the city lights painting quiet shapes across my walls. I pulled open the closet door, moved a pile of winter coats to the side, and stared down at the box. The label was still there. Phase 0, scrawled in blue ink that had started to fade. I lifted the lid slowly, as if something might jump out. But inside, it was exactly as I remembered. Old sketchbooks, spiral-bound notepads, a thumb drive in a plastic case. At the very bottom, a folder marked Initial Concept, Hybrid Energy Platform. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and flipped through the pages one by one. My handwriting stared back at me, bold, eager, full of ideas, systems, flowcharts, annotated equations, market projections. And there, on the third page, Core Design Flow, Hybrid System, registered 6 years ago. Below the title was my name, not a team, not a company, just mine. I ran my fingers along the paper, remembering the night I first showed it to Weston and Dad. We were sitting at the kitchen table, a rare night when they actually asked me something beyond, "How's work?" I'd been working on the project for nearly a year, juggling late-night consulting calls and early morning lab visits, pouring everything I had into a sustainable power model that could integrate old infrastructure with new tech. Weston had nodded along. Dad grunted once or twice. And then Weston had said, "It's ambitious. You sure this isn't over your head?" I'd laughed back then, shrugged it off. "You asked for feedback. he added. "Just trying to help." 3 years later, he launched his company with a nearly identical pitch. He called it Origin Point. Our parents had thrown a dinner to celebrate. Dad toasted him in the backyard with a scotch in hand and said, "Now this is what innovation looks like." I wasn't even invited. At the time, I told myself to let it go. I had no proof Weston took anything. I hadn't filed patents. I was still in development, still hopeful. I wanted to believe that maybe it was coincidence, that my family wouldn't knowingly do something like that, not to me. But now, looking at the blueprint in my hands, I realized it didn't matter whether it was legal or not. What mattered was that I handed them everything, and they told the world it was his. They knew. They all knew. And I had stayed silent, thinking loyalty meant swallowing truth. I placed the pages back in the folder, smoothing the edges. My fingers paused over the spine. My heart beat not with anger, but with clarity, like stepping out of a fog and realizing you've been walking in circles. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought I'd buried it. But the thing about silence, it has an expiration date. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, soft and steady. I clicked into my drafts folder, opened a new email, and stared at the blinking cursor. Subject line: regarding your upcoming negotiations with Brixton Tech. My fingers hovered, then moved. Each word I typed wasn't written with rage, but with resolve. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need a scene. All I needed was the truth. And that I had in my hands. I never meant to destroy them, just to finally show them who I really was. But sometimes, the truth is what tears the roof off. That thought lingered in my mind as I stepped into the elevator of the co-working building downtown. It was just past 9 a.m. on a cloudless Tuesday, the kind of day where Austin felt crisp, efficient. Nothing flashy, just sharp air and sharper minds. I checked my phone one last time before the elevator doors opened. No missed calls, no frantic texts from home. Of course not. They still had no idea. Inside the third-floor conference room, the team from Brixton Tech was already seated. 4 of them, all in navy and gray, coffees in front of them, folders laid out neatly. No one looked up when I walked in. "Ms. Devlin?" a young man asked without much conviction, still tapping on his tablet. I stepped forward, calm. "Marlowe. Just Marlowe is fine." That made them look up. I could see it, the flicker of surprise. They were expecting someone older, a man maybe, or at least someone less quiet. A tall woman with a tightly braided bun nodded at me and gestured to the seat at the end. "We were told a private consultant would be handling this review." "That's me," I said, setting down my slim black folder. "Independent review, as requested." I didn't come in with a title, just the work. The next 10 minutes moved in corporate rhythms, financial summaries, licensing charts, buzzwords meant to mask uncertainty. They weren't here to play games, and neither was I. It wasn't until they pulled up the shared screen and showed the latest prototype flowchart that my chest tightened. The color scheme was different, the branding was slick, but the bones, the logic, it was mine, exactly mine. "Have you had a chance to review the source materials from Devlin Group?" the VP asked. "They've cited something called the Phase Zero model as foundational tech." My fingers stayed still. "Actually, I have." I reached into my folder and pulled out 2 crisp documents, both notarized. One was the original hand-drawn design with the copyright stamp and my name. The other was a digital transfer of ownership to my LLC, time-stamped a year before Weston's company ever existed. I slid them across the table slowly, giving them time to read. The youngest man at the end blinked. "Wait, this design came from you?" I nodded once. "Yes. It was mine 6 years ago. I shared it with my family for input, a mistake I won't repeat." Silence wrapped around the room, but it wasn't shock I saw, it was calculation. The VP leaned back. "We were told this originated inside Devlin Group. They've been insisting on exclusivity terms." "They can insist all they want," I said quietly, "but that document proves they don't have the right to." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The VP glanced at the page again, then at me. "And what do you want from us exactly?" I took a slow breath. "I'm not here to blow up the deal. That's not my style." I leaned in, just slightly. "But I am offering you a direct licensing agreement through my firm. Cleaner, legally protected, and fair." Another long pause. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I continued. "I just don't think you should build a $500 million platform on top of a lie." That landed. I could see it in the way their posture shifted, less defensive now, more alert. They started flipping through the documents again, this time with more interest. The woman at the head cleared her throat. "This changes a lot." I gave her a small smile. "It does." She tapped her pen on the table. "We'll need to review internally." "Of course. I'll leave these copies with you," I said, sliding the folder to her side. As I stood, one of the middle-aged men, someone who'd stayed quiet the entire meeting, looked at me and said softly, "Aren't they your parents?" I paused with my hand on the chair. "They are," I said, "and they taught me something early on. Never burn a bridge you still live on." I looked him in the eye. "But they burned it, so here we are." The conference room felt colder as I walked out, though the sun through the windows was as warm as ever. I didn't rush, didn't look back. Downstairs, I stopped just outside the entrance and let the wind brush across my face. Inside, I was shaking, but on the surface, I was still, and that stillness was power. My silence was over, but I hadn't realized. When you speak truth to power, the power doesn't stay quiet. It had been 2 days since the meeting with Brixton. I spent most of it alone in my rental studio outside Dallas, trying to find stillness in clay and form. The space smelled faintly of plaster dust and eucalyptus. I'd lit one of those soy candles the client sent as a thank you last Christmas. It was quiet, a kind of quiet that used to comfort me. I was smoothing the curve of a ceramic shoulder when the studio door creaked open. At first, I thought it was the delivery guy who sometimes brought my glaze orders without knocking. But no, the figure that stepped in wasn't holding a package. It was my mother, pearl earrings, hair swept into a bun sharp enough to slice butter, cream-colored wool coat despite the warm afternoon, not a strand out of place, not a smile either. I stood frozen, clay still wet between my fingers. "I didn't think you remembered where I worked." She looked around slowly, distaste flickering across her features like a passing shadow. "I remember everything I paid for." There it was. I set the sculpture down gently, wiping my hands on a rag. "To what do I owe this unannounced inspection?" She walked closer, heels clicking against the cement floor like punctuation. "I'm not here to fight." "You're not really here to admire the art either," I replied. She paused. "I heard you've been speaking to Brixton." Straight to it. No sugar, no courtesy. I crossed my arms. "I have." She tilted her head, that familiar tone sliding in. "Marlo, sweetheart, you've always been so creative, but diving into legal interference, it just feels, what's the word? Chaotic." I didn't interfere. I clarified ownership. She let out a breath like a laugh, but with no joy. "You must know how this looks. You've been quiet for so long. People assumed you'd moved on. This sudden resurrection, it makes you look unwell." There was a glass of water on my work table. I picked it up, took a small sip, and held her gaze. "Speaking truth isn't a symptom." She stepped closer. "I'm only saying this because I care. There are things from your past, things you've worked hard to bury. I'd hate to see it all resurface just because of a misunderstanding." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She gave me a long, unreadable look, then said softly, "The hospital record, 17 years old. That episode, the breakdown, the whispers around it." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard anyone say those words in years. I didn't even know she still had access to that sealed file. I stared at her. "You kept it." She nodded, almost apologetically. "Just in case. People talk, Marlo. It's a fragile world out there. Reputation is everything. A sharp heat crawled up my chest. I turned away, hands trembling slightly. Clay dust stuck to my palms. My sculpture, an abstract form meant to represent resilience, looked ready to crumble. "You're threatening me." "No," she said quickly. "I'm warning you." I laughed under my breath, the sound brittle. "That's a distinction you made up. Same effect." She reached out, fingers grazing the edge of the table. "I'm trying to protect you. No one wants to see you humiliated. Just let this go. It's not worth tearing the family apart." I turned back to face her. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Tearing the family apart?" "You're making noise where there was peace." "Peace for who?" I asked, voice low. "For the people who lied, stole, gaslit their own daughter for daring to tell the truth?" She didn't flinch. Her face remained cool, polished. "You've always been emotional, Marlo. This isn't new." I straightened, every part of me steady now. "Silence wasn't wisdom," I said slowly. "It was survival. You taught me that." A flicker, just one, ran through her expression. "You're not here to save me," I continued. "You're here to make sure I stay buried. But that's over." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Tell Dad, if either of you keeps pushing, if you think I'll crawl back or be scared into silence, then prepare for everything to come out, including the design theft, publicly, with names." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a small nod, she turned and walked toward the door. Her voice, quiet but firm, floated back before she exited. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marlo." I didn't respond. The door clicked shut behind her. I stayed still for a long time, surrounded by the soft echo of her perfume and old ghosts. Then I picked up the sculpture again, cradling it gently. It hadn't broken, neither had I. I had drawn a line, but they didn't back down. They pushed harder, and this time, they crossed it. It was late, close to midnight, 2 days after my mother's visit. My friend Nora had dropped by with takeout and one of those comfort documentaries on sea otters. We'd curled up on my worn-out couch, chopsticks in hand, letting the soft hum of narration and ocean sounds wash over the tension. I remember exactly when the first notification buzzed, then the second. By the third ping, Nora leaned over and raised an eyebrow. "You expecting someone to blow up your phone this late?" I picked up the phone, thumbed the screen. There it was. Breaking. Whitmore heiress allegedly struggled with mental health, sources say. My breath hitched. A blurry photo loaded under the headline. It was me, 18, in a wrinkled hoodie, walking out of that hospital. Hair greasy, face pale, clutching my discharge papers like they were some sort of shield. No byline, no direct quotes, just a stream of implication and veiled language. "She has a long history of emotional instability," the article claimed. Multiple close family members confirmed concerning behavior dating back to adolescence. Business insiders question whether she is equipped for corporate responsibility. I dropped the phone. The clatter startled Nora. "Marlo." I didn't answer. I got up slowly, walked into the bathroom and shut the door. The light inside was harsh, too white, too clinical. The mirror caught my reflection, and for a second, I wasn't 35, an artist in my own rented space. I was 17 again, hunched in that waiting room, listening through a closed door as my father muttered to the psychiatrist, "She's weak. We don't invest in weak." I sat on the edge of the tub, hands gripping the porcelain. My heart pounded like it remembered everything before I did. The shame slithered in like smoke. That same voice whispering, "You were broken once. They'll believe them over you." I pressed my palms to my ears. Outside the door, Nora's voice came gently. "Whatever it is, they don't get to bury you with it. Not anymore." I couldn't speak, but I let that sink in. Let it crack something that had stayed frozen for too long. It took maybe 20 minutes before I stood up again. My face was flushed, my eyes raw, but something had shifted. I stepped back into the living room. Nora didn't ask questions, just handed me my phone. I expected more headlines. Instead, there was an email waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, I think you're ready to see this. The sender's name stopped me cold. Callan M. Former faculty, Eastwood Academy. I opened it. Inside was a scanned image of an original student design submission, mine. I knew every line, every concept sketch. My handwriting signed and dated it from when I was barely 18. I'd submitted it as part of a student innovation contest. I blinked hard. My signature was there, and so was the design, the one I'd thought my father had merely helped refine. But now, there it was. Proof. My original. My work. The same design his firm patented just 1 year later. Same structure. Same technical sketch. Except the name on the patent was his. I stared at the screen, pulse roaring in my ears. They hadn't just doubted me. They hadn't just gaslit my breakdown. They stole from me while I was too shaken to fight back. While I was rebuilding myself in silence, they'd built an empire using my hands and scrubbed my name from the foundation. I sat down at the kitchen counter, the email still open. Nora whispered, "What is it?" "My idea," I said slowly. They took it. All of it. A long silence followed. Then my voice, clearer than it had been all week. They tried to destroy me to cover what they stole. I hit reply. "Would you testify if I take this public?" Sent. Barely a minute passed before a response came through. "I was waiting for you to ask. I read it 3 times. Nora touched my arm gently. "You okay?" I exhaled. I wasn't going to beg them to stop anymore. I was going to show them what happens when silence learns to speak. The next 2 days moved like slow thunder. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse. I just got quiet, solid. That afternoon, I stepped out of the elevator into the polished hall of the arbitration office. Glass walls, quiet tension. Downtown Los Angeles had a way of making things look important, even when they weren't. But this was. The assistant at the desk gave me a nervous glance, then buzzed the inner doors. Inside, the Whitmores were already seated. My father at the end of the table, sleeves rolled up like he was too busy to be bothered. My mother sat with her arms crossed and lips pursed like she smelled something off. My sister leaned back with an iced coffee and a bored expression that didn't match the shaking leg under the table. The moment my heels clicked in, my mother's eyes widened. My father didn't look up right away. When he finally did, it was with a scowl. "I thought we said this wasn't necessary," he muttered. "Guess the board disagreed," I replied, sliding into the empty seat across from them. The arbitrator cleared his throat. "We're here to review the contractual integrity of the Whitmore licensing agreement, specifically regarding proprietary ownership tied to the core design in Clause 4A. No one blinked, except my father. His left eye twitched. I didn't say a word. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "Section 17B, I said calmly. "Patent rights, reversion clause, age 30. The attorney on their side frowned and picked up the page. His eyes scanned the lines, then scanned them again. His mouth parted just slightly. My father's voice came sharp. "That clause was symbolic. It doesn't hold—" The lawyer shook his head, slow. "Actually, it does. The clause was written into the student submission agreement before the firm acquired licensing. Since Ms. Whitmore reached the specified age, the rights reverted automatically unless legally reassigned, which they weren't." My mother's fingers gripped the edge of her chair. My sister scoffed. "She's bluffing." "Check the date stamp," I said, locking eyes with my father. It wasn't symbolic, it was binding, and now it's active. The room stilled. The board representative leaned forward. "To be clear, this means the core design used in the upcoming $590 million contract isn't currently licensed for use?" The silence answered before anyone could. "No," I replied, soft but steady. "Not without my approval, or compensation." My father stood abruptly. "This is extortion." "No," I replied, rising with him. "This is correction. For years of theft dressed as legacy." My sister's voice cracked. "You don't understand the damage you're doing?" I looked at her, almost sad. You mean the kind of damage done when a 17-year-old's breakdown is paraded as proof she shouldn't own what she built? The arbitrator cleared his throat again, more forcefully. If this is going to escalate, I'll be forced to call for a recess. No need, I said, gathering my things. I'm done. I paused by the door, glancing back only once. My father stared at me, red-faced and silent. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. You always said I was too emotional, I said, adjusting the strap on my bag. Turns out I just needed time. And law school. As I reached for the handle, my fingers brushed against the ring on my hand, a soft pale blue stone, cool to the touch. My grandfather had given it to me on my 10th birthday, calling it quiet strength in a storm. My mother once said it looked like cheap glass. It was real sapphire. I walked out without another word. Linked to next chapter, they tried to strip me of everything, my sanity, my name, my future, but they forgot to take the one thing that would always be mine, my truth. By the time I got home, the sun had already dipped below the skyline. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. The silence inside was more comforting than anything bright or artificial. I poured myself a glass of water, placed my bag by the door, and sat on the edge of the couch, still in the same clothes from the arbitration. That night, I slept without dreams. Not because I was at peace, but because for once I wasn't carrying the weight of unfinished things. At 6:17 a.m., my phone lit up. Then again, and again, and again. By the time I blinked fully awake, the screen was flooded. Calls, texts, headlines, emails, push notifications from news apps I hadn't opened in years. The very first message I tapped was from my old professor at CalArts. You just rewrote the playbook. Congrats, kiddo. I stared at the message for a moment before scrolling up. That's when I saw it. A screenshot of a national business outlet. Front page. Failure daughter kills 590 Mellors. Whitmore deal. Reclaims patent power. Another headline just beneath it. The silent giant. Who is Marlo Whitmore? I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. Not yet. Just a strange stillness, like watching a wave crash from behind bulletproof glass. The next call was from an unknown number. I ignored it. Then came one I recognized. My mother. For a moment, I just stared at the name. Then I answered. Her voice was soft, shaky. Marlo, you've humiliated us. Everyone's talking. I can't even go outside. I didn't respond. Why did you do it this way? She continued, sniffling like I'd left her standing in the rain. You embarrassed your father. Do you even understand what this means for the family? I understand exactly what it means, I said, my voice clear. It means the truth finally made it out the front door. Before she could answer, I ended the call. 2 minutes later, my father tried. This time the tone was clipped, controlled. We need to talk. Come to the estate. Today. No apology, no explanation, just a command, the same as always. I didn't owe them anything, but I went. Not because they summoned me, but because I was ready to end this on my own terms. By the time I pulled into the long driveway in Pasadena, the air felt heavy, not with heat, but with memory. The kind that clings to the corners of old houses and never fully leaves. The front door was already open when I walked up. My father stood in the entryway, arms crossed, jaw clenched. My mother lingered a few steps behind him, makeup thinner than usual, eyes rimmed with red. We built this name from scratch, my father said, without so much as a hello. You just ripped it apart. You built it, I replied evenly, on what you stole. He scoffed. You were always too dramatic. And you, I said quietly, were always too proud. That's why you never saw me coming. There was a pause. I looked around. Same marble floor, same piano no one touched, same scent of lemon wood polish and judgment. I'm not here to gloat, I added. I came to offer one thing. Their eyes lifted. I'll license the design to you, but only for non-profit charitable initiatives. No profit, no personal gain, not a cent. My mother's mouth dropped open. You can't be serious. That piece is mine, I cut in. And this is my line in the sand. "You're splitting the family!" My sister's voice rang out from the staircase. She hadn't even come down to greet me, just hovered like she always had, above and removed, ready to judge but never to engage. I turned to her, my voice steady. "You split it the moment you decided image was worth more than love." The silence that followed wasn't shocked, it was exposed. I took one long look around. This place had tried to crush me. This family had written me out like an ink stain. But here I was, not erased, not broken, just done. As I stepped toward the door, I let my hand brush the frame. The same one I'd been slammed against at 16 during a shouting match that ended with my father calling me unstable and storming out. This time, no one stopped me. I walked through it standing tall. Outside, the air had shifted. A soft breeze lifted the edge of my scarf, the one my grandmother knit for me just before she passed. I hadn't worn it in years, but something made me take it out of the drawer this morning. As it fluttered gently across my cheek, I heard her voice again, faint but certain. "You'll bloom late, sweetheart, but when you do, the world will notice." I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for them to see me and started seeing myself. They once told me I was too small to matter, but now they had to watch the empire crumble, brick by brick, because of one insignificant girl. 2 weeks later, I sat at a corner table in a quiet cafe tucked between a plant shop and an old bookstore in Silver Lake. The kind of place where no one rushed, and the barista already knew my order before I said a word. Outside the window, the jacaranda trees had just begun to bloom, petals dusting the sidewalk like lavender snow. Inside, I cradled a warm mug between my palms, cinnamon oat milk latte, my favorite. Comforting in a way that felt earned, not indulgent. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new article. Marlo Varon, From Exiled Heiress to Biotech Vanguard. I didn't open it, just swiped it away like a leaf off my sleeve. I'd stopped needing validation from the world the moment I walked out of that estate with my scarf floating behind me like a banner. I wasn't a story, I was just living. The notebook in front of me was half filled with ideas. Grants, mentoring programs, lab initiatives for young women who didn't have last names that opened doors, or fathers who paid for labs. I wasn't building another empire. I was building a way out for the ones who'd never even been invited in. I took another sip, flipped to a blank page, and just sat for a moment, breathing. Letting the stillness settle in without feeling guilty for it. That's when I saw her. A small figure hesitated just inside the doorway, peeking around the pastry case. Natalie, 10 years old, wide brown eyes, holding something bundled in her arms. I stood slowly, unsure what to expect. She walked toward me, boots squeaking faintly on the tile, and held out the scarf, my scarf, the one my grandmother had knit with that uneven edge I never had the heart to fix. "Mom said you left this behind," she said softly. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and gently wrapped the scarf around her neck. "No, sweetheart, I left it for you." She looked up at me like she didn't quite understand, but part of her did. I smiled. "It's yours now." Her small arms wrapped around me. No words, just that hug, and something in my chest shifted, not shattered, not cracked, but eased, like a thread finally relaxing. Natalie didn't stay long. Her grandmother, my mother, waited outside in a car I didn't bother to look at. But as she left, scarf trailing, I hoped she remembered how it felt to be seen without being expected to prove herself. After she disappeared down the sidewalk, I sat back down. The coffee was lukewarm now, but I didn't mind. They'd said I tore the family apart. But they were wrong. I'd broken the cycle. The quiet deals behind closed doors, the favors traded for silence, the cold glances that replaced real conversation, the idea that worth had to be earned through loyalty, submission, or sacrifice. I didn't destroy the family. I just stopped participating in its sickness. And now, I was helping other girls, ones with curious minds and unsure voices, learn that they could matter without asking for permission. That afternoon, I went home. Not the mansion, not a sterile condo, Just a little craftsman house I'd fixed up myself with thrifted shelves and creaky floors that told stories with every step. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed it again. That faint dent in the doorframe just beside the living room. The one from all those years ago when my father had thrown a shoe during an argument and missed by inches. We never patched it. We all just walked past it like it wasn't there. I stood in front of it now, fingers grazing the groove. But I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything that needed to be shouted. I reached for the knob and closed the door, not with force, just enough to hear the latch click quietly into place. That sound, soft and final, meant more than any headline ever had. They shut me out to protect their image. I walked away to protect my soul. Have you ever had to walk away from the very people you once begged to see you? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.